Most deaths force change. Masterson's didn't. He hit the ice on January 13th, 1968. 2 days later, he was gone. The league had a memorial trophy before the season ended. The rule that killed him stayed on the books for 11 more years. The culture that killed him stayed on the ice for 29. Hockey moved on, quietly. To understand why his death mattered, you have to understand how unlikely it was that he was even on the ice. William John Masterton grew up in Winnipeg in the 1940s, in a house where Saturday nights meant the radio, a dial tuned to Hockey Night in Canada, and a kid imagining Foster Hewitt calling his name. That was the dream every Canadian boy his age had. The difference was that Bill was actually good enough to chase it. By the time he finished at Miles McDonald Collegiate, scouts knew his name. He went to the University of Denver on a hockey scholarship and turned into one of the best college players in the country. 2 NCAA championships in 1960 and 1961. MVP of the 1961 tournament. Twice an All-American. By the time he graduated, he was the all-time leading scorer in Denver Pioneers history, a record that stood for 25 years. Montreal signed him. In 1961, that was the closest thing to winning the lottery. The Canadiens were the most dominant franchise in pro sports. They were also the problem. The NHL in 1961 had 6 teams, 6 rosters, around 120 jobs in the entire league. Montreal had so much depth at center that a 22-year-old All-American couldn't crack the lineup. Bill spent 2 years bouncing through the minors with the Hull Ottawa Canadiens of the Eastern Professional Hockey League, and then the Cleveland Barons of the American Hockey League, leading the Barons in scoring with 82 points in 1962-63, and finishing runner-up for the league's top rookie award. In 1963, he stopped waiting. He walked away from professional hockey at 24. Not because he wasn't good enough, because the math of the original 6 era said there was no room for him. He went back to school, finished a master's degree in business administration at the University of Denver, and took a job in Minneapolis at Honeywell. This is the part of his life that most retellings skip. Bill Masterton spent the next 4 years working at Honeywell on the Apollo program. The same Apollo program that put astronauts on the moon. He wasn't a hockey player who happened to have a job. He was a corporate professional with a wife named Carol, 2 adopted children, Scott and Sally, a house in the Twin Cities, and a career that had nothing to do with the dream he'd grown up with. He still played. He laced up for the St. Paul Steers of the United States Hockey League and later captained the U.S. national team in 1966-67, where he was considered the team's most valuable player. But by every measure that counted, he was done. He'd built a safe life. The dream was a story he'd tell his kids one day. Then, the league changed. In 1967, the NHL did something it hadn't done in 25 years. It doubled in size overnight. 6 new expansion franchises were added in a single offseason, including a team in Minnesota called the North Stars. Suddenly, there were 120 new jobs in professional hockey, and a man who'd quit the game 4 years earlier had something he'd never had before: leverage. Ren Blair was the first general manager of the North Stars. He needed players, and he needed them fast. He had watched Masterton in the senior leagues and on the U.S. national team and remembered exactly who he was. Blair bought Masterton's rights from Montreal for cash and made him an offer. One more shot. Age 29, a wife, 2 kids, a real career. He said yes. He made the team out of training camp, which surprised even him. On October 11th, 1967, in the very first regular season game in Minnesota North Stars history, Bill Masterton scored the first goal the franchise ever produced. By January, he had 4 goals and 8 assists in 38 games. The team had been in first place in the New West Division at the midway point for the season. He had everything to play for. That's the part you have to hold in your head going into what happens next. Not a kid chasing a dream. A grown man, 4 years out of the game, finally getting the call. What happened on January 13th didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a week his teammates already knew was coming. Goaltender Cesar Maniego, his neighbor, said Masterson had been complaining about severe migraines for over a week. Players in practice recalled seeing him black out mid-rush, skate to the bench, shake it off, and go again. John Muckler, who coached the North Stars farm team in Memphis, believed Masterson may have suffered a brain injury as early as training camp. The night before the Oakland game, Masterson's family was at Maniego's house for his 29th birthday. Masterson confided in him about the headaches. Ren Blair and the trainer had noticed his face going almost purple during practices and discussed having him seen by a doctor. But Masterson never told Blair, and the check never happened. January 13th, 1968. Met Center, Bloomington, Minnesota. North Stars hosting the Oakland Seals. First period, 4 minutes in. The score is 0-0. Masterson picks up the puck and skates it across the blue line into the offensive zone, cutting to the right. He slides a pass to his right wing, Wayne Connolly. As the pass releases, one of the Seals defenders' sticks tangles with his skates and he begins to lose his balance. Then Larry Cahan and Ron Harris close in. It's a clean check, no penalty called. Referee Wally Harris later compared the impact to an explosion, saying he was checked hard, but I'm sure it wasn't a dirty play. Masterson was off balance when the hit landed because he'd just released the pass, and that's what made it lethal. He fell backward, and the back of his head hit the ice. The sound carried. Teammates closer to the play got there first. Andre Boudria, one of the North Stars players who actually wore a helmet that season, helped wave the trainer onto the ice. Masterson was bleeding from his nose, his ears, and his mouth. For a few seconds, he came to. He looked at the men around him, and he murmured the same 2 words twice. Never again, never again. Then, he lost consciousness for good. The trainer and the team doctor worked on him on the bench, then in the dressing room, then loaded him into an ambulance bound for the Fairview Southdale Hospital in Edina, 7 miles away. The game continued. It ended 2-2. Most of the crowd didn't know the severity yet. At the hospital, 2 neurosurgeons and 3 other doctors worked through the options. The brain was swelling faster than they could intervene. They decided against surgery because the trauma was too far advanced for any procedure to help. They put him on a ventilator and called the family. Carol had been watching from the stands. She got to the hospital that night. His parents flew in from Winnipeg. His brother came too. For nearly 30 hours, the family sat with him on life support. The North Stars had a road game in Boston the next night. The team flew through a snowstorm, and the game was already in progress when they arrived. Blair stayed behind at the hospital in Minneapolis. Boston won 9-2. At 1:55 a.m. on January 15th, 1968, Bill Masterton was pronounced dead. He was 29 years old. Blair was notified at 4 a.m. and informed the players room by room the next morning. For 43 years, the official story was simple and clean. Masterton hit his head on the ice. He wasn't wearing a helmet. He died. The lesson was about helmets. In 2011, the Toronto Star published an investigation that took the autopsy file to 2 of the most respected concussion specialists in North America. Dr. Charles Tatter, a neurosurgeon at the University of Toronto, and later Dr. Jesse Corey, a neurocritical care specialist in St. Paul. Both reached the same conclusion. The single hit on January 13th wasn't what killed him. What killed Bill Masterton was second impact syndrome. Second impact syndrome happens when a person suffers a concussion, and then, before the brain is healed, takes a second blow. The second hit doesn't have to be hard. The brain, already inflamed, swells catastrophically and shuts down. It is one of the most lethal sequences in sports medicine. And in 1968, almost no one in professional sports knew it existed. The autopsy, performed 7 hours after he died, found evidence of a prior injury to the left temple, a blow taken in a game some days before. The migraines, the blackouts in practice, the discoloration the coaches had noticed, those weren't separate problems. They were warning signs of an unhealed concussion. Dr. Corey's conclusion was direct. The amount of swelling could not have come from a single impact. The injury was planted days before. That changes the question. The question is not whether a helmet would have saved him. The question is whether anyone in the building that night should have let him play. The day after his death, the NHL held its All-Star game in Toronto. Masterson's body wasn't yet in the ground. Reporters and players spent the weekend debating helmets. The Professional Hockey Writers Association came forward with a proposal, a memorial trophy, awarded to the player annually who best embodied perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to hockey. The league approved it immediately. Within months, the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy existed. It has been awarded every season since. That was the part the league moved fast on. The other conversation, the one about helmets, moved differently. NHL President Clarence Campbell told reporters the league had no plans to mandate helmet use, granting only that the inordinate skill of the players had prevented more serious injuries. Over the next 3 years, the NHL's Board of Governors voted on mandatory helmets 3 separate times. They rejected it 3 separate times. The reasons given in private were the same reasons given in public. Helmets looked weak. Fans wouldn't recognize the players. Stars opposed it. Decades later, Andre Boudria gave an interview in which he said Ren Blair had asked him to take his helmet off. He refused. Boudria finished the 1967-68 season as the second leading scorer on the Minnesota team. The next year, he was traded. He has stated openly that he believes the helmet was part of the reason. So, in the same 12-month window, the NHL did 2 things. It put Bill Masterson's name on a piece of silver, and it traded a player who tried to wear the equipment that might have saved him. The trophy was the easy part. It didn't require an owner to argue with a star, or a coach to argue with a tradition, or a sponsor to swallow a slower-looking product. Symbols are cheap. The rule that might have actually changed the sport took another 11 years. Before the 1979-80 season, more than a decade after Masterson's funeral, the NHL finally required helmets for new players. Listen carefully, because the wording matters. Helmets were mandatory for any player who signed his first professional contract after June 1st, 1979. Anyone already in the league before that date was permitted to keep playing without one as long as he signed a waiver acknowledging the risk. That single clause is the reason the helmetless era didn't end in 1979. By the late 1980s, the holdouts could be counted on 2 hands. Guy Lafleur came out of retirement in 1988 and played without a helmet until 1991. Rod Langway captained the Washington Capitals until 1993. Harold Snepps, Doug Wilson, Ron Duguay, all of them grandfathered in, all of them sticking with the look they'd built their careers on. The last man standing was Craig McTavish, who had 4 Stanley Cups by the time he was the only player in the league still skating without a helmet. His final NHL game was on April 15, 1997. That's 29 years and 3 months between the moment Bill Masterson's head hit the ice and the moment the last bare-skulled player left it. It would be easier to tell this as a closed chapter, except the same league ran the same playbook in 2013 with visors. Mandatory only for new players, everyone already in the league grandfathered out. Today, more than 100 former NHL players are part of ongoing concussion litigation against the league. The lawsuits don't mention Bill Masterton by name. They don't have to. The argument is about a pattern. The league had the medical data. The league had the player testimony. The league had decades of evidence about what repeated head trauma does to a human brain. And every time it was asked to act, it acted slowly, partially, with a clause built in for the people already on the ice. Carol Masterton raised their 2 children alone. Their son Scott was 3 years old when his father died. In 2016, he told ESPN the family lived with the accident for many years, but did not talk about it. That's the cost that stayed inside one house in Minnesota while the league handed out silverware in his name every June. Bill Masterton did not die because of one bad hit. He died because a culture taught him to play through warning signs, a league refused to mandate the equipment that other levels of hockey had already required, and a sport rewarded men who walked it off and traded the ones who didn't. The trophy went up that year, The rule took 11 more. The culture took 29. And the lawsuits are still being written. Now I want to hear from you. If the league knew what was coming and waited anyway, where does the responsibility actually land? Drop your honest take in the comments. Subscribe before the next one drops. There's a story coming that most hockey fans have never been told. And once you hear it, you won't look at the sport the same way.